Power in Los Angeles doesn't announce itself with gunfire or dramatic confrontations. It moves quietly through penthouse offices, encrypted phone calls, and carefully arranged political donations. For 15 years, Kim Jae-sung built an empire that existed in the shadows of legitimate business. Shipping containers that never got inspected, gambling halls disguised as social clubs, digital currencies flowing through channels no government could trace. He controlled Koreatown not through violence, but through infrastructure, through relationships, through marriage. The divorce changed everything. Entertainment news channels displayed the courthouse steps where photographers captured him leaving alone. His wife's family had controlled 3 of the 5 financial pipelines that kept his operations liquid. The marriage wasn't love, it was architecture. And when she filed papers citing emotional abandonment and irreconcilable differences, she didn't just leave him. She destabilized the entire structure. Inside the organization, whispers began immediately. Captains who once spoke in definitive terms now used phrases like, "We should consider," and "Perhaps it's time to discuss." His underboss, a man named Park who had served loyally for 8 years, started scheduling meetings without clearing them first. Small gestures, tiny rebellions. In organized crime, doubt spreads faster than blood. Jae-sung recognized the pattern. He had seen it happen to other bosses. Divorce, illness, a son who disappoints. Any crack in the foundation invites pressure. The smart move would be to demonstrate strength. Make an example. Remind everyone why fear kept them aligned. But he was tired, genuinely deeply tired. Tired of performing invincibility. Tired of strategic marriages and calculated friendships and men who smiled while mentally measuring his coffin. So, instead of holding court at his usual private rooms, surrounded by security and sycophants, he started doing something dangerous. He started going places alone. The restaurant was called Stellar's, not because it was elegant, but because the owner's daughter loved astronomy. It sat on a quiet corner where Koreatown bled into a neighborhood that hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. The kind of place that served good food to people who didn't care about being seen. Jae-sung discovered it accidentally, 2 months before the divorce was finalized, when his driver took a wrong turn avoiding traffic. He came back because nobody recognized him. Or if they did, they had the decency not to care. The staff consisted of an older Korean man who ran the kitchen, his daughter who managed the register, and a waitress who worked the late shift. She was black, maybe 30, with natural hair pulled back, and the kind of calm efficiency that comes from years of reading people who don't tip well. Her name tag said Michelle. The first time she took his order, she didn't fawn, didn't ask if he needed anything special, didn't recognize his face from the news coverage that had been running for weeks. She just wrote down his order, brought him water, and left him alone. That absence of performance felt like oxygen. He started coming every Thursday around 10 p.m., late enough that the dinner crowd had cleared, but early enough that the kitchen wasn't closing. He'd sit in the corner booth, eat quietly, and leave cash that included a decent but not suspicious tip. Michelle would refill his water without asking, bring his food without commentary, and treat him exactly like every other customer who wanted a meal and silence. For a man whose entire existence was about perception and positioning, being invisible felt revolutionary. But visibility has a way of finding powerful men, even when they're trying to hide, especially when people inside their own organization have started asking questions about succession. Park, his underboss, had been making moves, quiet ones. He'd started building relationships with captains who controlled street-level operations, started suggesting strategic pivots that would benefit his own interests, started floating ideas about what leadership might look like if circumstances changed. He hadn't moved openly yet. That would be suicide. But he was laying groundwork. And part of that groundwork involved knowing where the boss went when he disappeared every Thursday night. Information travels in organized crime the same way it travels everywhere else. Through people who need favors, who owe debts, who want to prove value. A driver mentions a route. A security guard remembers a location. A captain's cousin works nearby and notices a pattern. Park learned about Stellar's 3 weeks after Jae-sung started going there regularly. He also learned that Jae-sung went alone. No security, no backup, just a man eating soup in a neighborhood diner, like he wasn't worth $30 million and controlled half the underground economy in Los Angeles. That kind of carelessness deserved to be tested. Park didn't want Jae-sung dead. Not yet. That would create chaos and investigations and federal attention nobody needed. But he wanted to know something important. He wanted to know if the boss's security apparatus would react faster than the boss could think. He wanted to see if the man who built an empire on control had gotten soft, distracted, vulnerable. So he arranged a test. A man would be hired. Someone with no connections to the organization. Someone expendable. He'd be given a gun and instructions to create a moment of chaos. Not necessarily to kill, just to threaten. To see what happened when carefully constructed power met real, unpredictable danger. Thursday night arrived with typical Los Angeles indifference. Cool air, traffic sounds, the smell of grilled meat from the restaurant's kitchen mixing with exhaust from the street. Jae-sung arrived at his usual time, parked 2 blocks away, and walked into Stellar's wearing jeans and a jacket that cost more than the monthly rent on the building. Michelle was refilling salt shakers near the kitchen when he entered. She glanced up, recognized him with the barest nod, and gestured toward his usual booth. He sat down, opened the menu he had memorized, waited. That's when the busboy appeared. Michelle had been working at Stellar's for 4 years, long enough to recognize patterns, long enough to know when something felt wrong even if she couldn't immediately articulate why. The new busboy appeared during the same shift a regular customer would arrive. That alone wasn't unusual. Staff turnover in restaurants happened constantly. People quit, got better jobs, moved away. But this guy was different. He moved through the dining room too carefully, like someone conscious of being watched. His posture was wrong for someone who'd worked service before. Too upright, shoulders back. The kind of bearing you saw in men who'd done military time or security work, not in someone hired to clear plates. Michelle noticed because noticing was survival. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where reading a room meant knowing whether you should cross the street or keep walking straight, where body language told you whether someone was dangerous, desperate, or just lost. That education didn't disappear when she moved to Los Angeles, got a work permit, and started serving food to people who barely looked at her face. The busboy kept adjusting his left sleeve. Small movements, like something underneath was uncomfortable. His shoes were too clean, too expensive for someone working minimum wage plus tips. And when customers spoke to him, he didn't make eye contact, didn't smile, just nodded and moved away. Michelle watched him from the corner of her eye while she took orders and refilled drinks. Watched him move closer to the corner booth. Watched him bend down near the trash bin with his back to the wall. That's when she saw the flash of metal. Not a phone, not keys, something heavier, something deliberately concealed. Her heart rate increased, but her expression didn't change. Years of managing handsy customers and aggressive drunks had taught her to keep her face neutral while her brain calculated options. She could yell, could run, could ignore it and hope she was wrong, or she could act. She picked up the teapot from the service station. Hot, fresh brewed. She walked toward the corner booth where her regular customer sat, reading something on his phone. The man who always ordered the same soup, left the same tip, and never caused problems. The busboy was 3 feet away now, right hand moving toward his sleeve. Michelle didn't hesitate. She walked directly to the table, smiled pleasantly, and poured the entire pot of scalding tea directly onto the customer's lap. He jerked backward with a shout. The table shifted. Liquid splashed across expensive jeans and the leather seat. Other customers turned to look. The kitchen door swung open as the owner's daughter rushed out to see what happened. And in that moment of chaos, the busboy's hand completed its movement. The gun cleared his sleeve. Small caliber, silencer attached. He raised it toward the corner booth just as the target lurched sideways from the scalding liquid. The shot went wide, punched through the vinyl backing of the booth, and embedded in drywall. Before the busboy could adjust his aim, the front door exploded inward. 2 men in suits moved with practiced violence. One tackled the busboy into a table. The other had a weapon drawn before Michelle could process what was happening. Customers screamed. Someone ran toward the kitchen. The owner started yelling in Korean. The busboy hit the floor hard. His gun skittered under a chair. One of the suited men planted a knee on his spine, while the other swept the room with cold efficiency, making sure there were no additional threats, no secondary shooters, no complications. Jae-sung stood slowly. Tea dripped from his clothes. His phone had clattered to the floor. But his eyes were calm, focused. He looked at the subdued gunman, looked at his security team who had apparently been positioned outside the entire time, then looked at Michelle, who still held the empty teapot with both hands. Nobody spoke for 3 seconds. Then Jae-sung said something in Korean to his security. Sharp, commanding. One of them zip-tied the busboy's wrists while the other made a phone call. The owner's daughter was frozen behind the register. The kitchen had gone silent. Jae-sung walked toward Michelle, not threatening, just focused. He stopped 3 feet away and spoke quietly in English. You saw something. It wasn't a question. Michelle set the teapot down on the nearest table. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was catching up. But her voice stayed level. His shoes were wrong, and he kept touching his sleeve. Jae-sung studied her face, looking for deception, for calculation, for any sign that this was performance rather than instinct. He found nothing, except a woman who'd acted on pattern recognition and was now realizing exactly how dangerous the situation had been. You could have run, he said. You would have been shot. That's not your problem, Michelle met his eyes directly. You always tip 20%, and you never make me uncomfortable. So yeah, it kind of was. Something shifted in his expression. Not gratitude, not affection, something closer to recognition. He reached into his jacket. Michelle tensed, but he just pulled out a business card. Plain white, no name, just a phone number. If anyone asks you questions about tonight, call this number first. Then he turned to his security and said something else in Korean. They hauled the busboy to his feet and moved toward the back exit. Within 90 seconds, they were gone. The only evidence anything had happened was the bullet hole in the booth, broken dishes on the floor, and a dining room full of shocked customers. The owner came out from the kitchen, looked at Michelle, looked at the damage, started to say something and stopped. He'd lived in Koreatown long enough to know when questions would create more problems than answers. Michelle's shift ended at midnight. She cleaned up broken glass, comped everyone's meals, and told the owner she'd pay for the damaged booth out of her tips. He waved her off, told her to go home, get rest. She walked to her car with her phone in her hand and Jae-sung's business card in her pocket. She didn't call the number, but she didn't throw the card away either. The busboy's real name was Michael Chen, 26 years old, dishonorably discharged from the Marines 3 years prior for assault. He'd been working private security for casinos and nightclubs until 2 weeks ago when someone offered him $15,000 for a single night's work. He told Jae-sung's interrogators all of this within 20 minutes, not because they tortured him, because they made it clear that cooperation was the only variable that determined whether he saw daylight again. Chen wasn't loyal to anyone. He'd been hired through an intermediary, told to apply for a job at Stellar's under a fake name, told which night to work, told where the target would be sitting. He was supposed to fire twice, center mass, then walk out the back door where a car would be waiting. Nobody mentioned that the target had security positioned nearby. Nobody mentioned that the entire setup was designed to fail, because the goal was never actually assassination. It was information. Jae-sung understood this immediately. Chen was expendable, disposable, the kind of man you hired when you wanted something to look like an amateur attempt, when you wanted to create chaos and see how different pieces moved in response. Someone inside his organization had wanted to test his security response, wanted to see if his personal protection had degraded during the divorce, wanted to know if he'd grown careless. But more importantly, someone had known his exact location on a specific night. Information that only 3 people possessed: his head of security, his driver, and Park, his underboss, who'd been asking questions about succession planning for the past 6 weeks. Jae-sung sat in his penthouse office overlooking downtown Los Angeles. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimal furniture, the aesthetic of a man who'd stopped pretending comfort mattered. His head of security, a man named Kim Min-jun, stood near the door with his hands clasped behind his back. He'd been with Jae-sung for 12 years, had taken bullets for him, had disappeared bodies when necessary. The leak came from your team, Jae-sung said without looking away from the window. Min-jun's jaw tightened. I know. How long have you known? 3 days. I've been running counter-surveillance on everyone with access to your schedule. And? Your driver's cousin works for Park, mentioned your Thursday routine during a family dinner. Park's been building a file for weeks. Jae-sung turned from the window. His expression was calm, but his eyes were cold. Park wanted to know if I'd gotten weak, if security had gotten sloppy, if my divorce had made me vulnerable. Yes. What did tonight's failure teach him? Minjun allowed himself a small, bitter smile. That a civilian noticed the threat before trained professionals did. That was the detail that mattered most. Not that Park had tested him, not that security had been compromised, but that someone outside the organization, someone with no training or experience, had seen what armed men missed. A waitress had saved his life because she paid attention to wrong shoes and nervous hands. That fact was now spreading through the organization like poison. Captains were hearing the story. Soldiers were repeating it. Jae-sung's security apparatus had failed while a woman serving soup had succeeded. In a culture built on reputation and perceived capability, that humiliation was worse than the assassination attempt itself. Park will move soon, Minjun said. He'll frame this as proof you need new leadership, younger blood, someone who hasn't been distracted by personal problems. Let him. Minjun looked surprised. You're not going to move against him? I'm going to let him think he has momentum. Let him make calls, build alliances, overextend. And then, Jae-sung walked to his desk, opened a drawer, pulled out the business card Michelle had left on the table at Stellar's when she'd cleaned up the mess. Her handwriting on the back. An address, a phone number, information she'd provided without being asked. Then I'm going to remind everyone what loyalty actually looks like. He handed the card to Minjun. Put surveillance on her apartment. Discreet. I want to know if anyone approaches her. If Park thinks she's leverage, he'll try to use her. And if he does, then we'll know exactly how far his ambition goes. Minjun took the card and left without another word. Jae-sung returned to the window, looked out at the city that he'd controlled for 15 years through careful planning and ruthless execution. The divorce had weakened him. He knew that, could feel it in how people spoke to him now. The slight hesitation before following orders. The way conversations stopped when he entered rooms. But weakness was only permanent if you accepted it. And tonight, a woman with no training and no agenda had reminded him of something important. Power wasn't about the size of your security team or the sophistication of your operations. It was about seeing clearly, acting decisively, and understanding that sometimes the most dangerous threats came from people you'd trained to protect you. Park wanted a war of perception. Wanted to frame Jae-sung as a divorced, distracted boss who'd lost his edge. Fine, let him try. Because the next move wouldn't be about violence or intimidation. It would be about demonstrating the difference between fear and respect, and about showing his organization that loyalty wasn't bought through salary and threats. It was earned through action, when action mattered most. Michelle didn't expect to see him again. After the shooting, after the security team disappeared with the gunman, after she'd cleaned up broken plates and told the owner she'd pay for damages, she'd gone home expecting police interviews and complications. Instead, nothing happened. No detectives showed up. No news coverage appeared. The whole incident vanished like it had been surgically removed from reality. That disappearance told her everything she needed to know about the man who'd been sitting in the corner booth. So when a black sedan appeared outside her apartment 3 days later, she wasn't entirely surprised. She watched from her third-floor window as the driver stepped out, waited exactly 60 seconds, then looked up directly at her building. Not searching, knowing. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. There's a car outside. The voice was male, Korean accent, professional. Mr. Kim would like to speak with you. No obligation, no pressure, just conversation. Michelle looked at the sedan. And if I say no? Then the car leaves and you never hear from us again. She believed him, which was strange, because she'd spent most of her 20s learning not to trust men who made promises. But something about the mechanical politeness, the complete lack of threat in his voice, felt more honest than any aggressive reassurance would have been. Give me 5 minutes, she said.